I wanted to be involved as a dad. I wanted to help my wife as she recovered physically. I have 3 daughters. My oldest one is 15 years old. And people always make stupid comments. They're like, oh, you got a teenager, that must be tough. Does she even talk to you? I was like, we have some lead dads who are historically been called stay-at-home dads. We call them lead dads who devote all their time to their families. But I hate that term because if you're a parent, you're not ever really staying home. You're active, you're out there. One of the big struggles for men is that we often communicate shoulder to shoulder. I need to go out and make money. And I said, I'm not saying that that's not correct, but that is a very limited definition of provider. What if you redefine provider as caregiver, supporter, person who's able to take half an hour and go get an ice cream with his son or daughter? Children, whether we have sons or daughters, when they see both mom and dad being deeply involved in parenting, they're going to take that into their own lives. Nobody on their deathbed thinks, okay, I wish I'd spent less time with my family.
Paul, welcome to Dadsense.
Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to our chat. Of course, I found you through my research, and we got connected, and we of course found a common friend as well, Rupesh, who you have met and talked about. But I'm very, very excited to talk to you about your work that you've been leading for the last so many years in fatherhood, lead dads, company of dads. From my side, this journey started about 2 years back when we started this podcast, again, to shine a light on fatherhood and to bring, particularly in a country and culture like India, where fathers have had a big role to play, but of course we've had the same stereotypes and the same constraints and challenges that you've been working through in the US. So it's been a great journey and fulfilling journey, and I'm looking forward to yet another sort of insightful conversation.
Yeah, I think we'll have a lot to share. As you alluded to, our mutual friend in common, Rupesh, a couple of years ago, he and I did a podcast for a while called the Global Dads Council, and it was me and Rupesh, and then a fellow from Singapore, a guy from the UK. And, what did we find out? These 4 guys from English-speaking countries, but, vastly, spread geographically vastly apart. We had a lot more in common than you would think, but we're all going against the same stereotypes as to what men should do versus what men actually are doing today as fathers.
That's right. Let's start. In fact, I'd like to start to your life journey and what really triggered this movement called the Lead Dad and the Company of Dads, more from a personal angle. I know you've been a journalist at the New York Times for a long time. You had a really successful career. Could you talk to us about what really inspired you to think about fatherhood, particularly fathers who are sort of playing that role of active caregivers, and for our audience, explain what does a lead dad mean, and how did you encounter that situation, and we'll go from there.
So I'll define lead dad first, and a lead dad is the go-to parent, whether he works full-time, part-time, or devotes all of his time to his family. In many cases, he's there to support his spouse or partner in whatever they're doing. We say many cases because, at least in the United States, 18% of fathers are divorced, widowed, or otherwise single. And then the third part of that is if that lead dad is working, he is there to be an ally to working moms and caregivers in the office. He's sort of leading by example. But that's not, over 10 years ago, almost 12 years ago now, when I first stepped into this role of lead dad, I just kind of threw the term out there, kind of in a half joking way with my wife. And so it was 2013. I grew up very modestly in a rural part of Massachusetts, so on the northeast part of the United States, a very rural part where my parents were divorced, and they're very bad at being married, and they're even worse at being divorced. And so my father figure... At
what age were they separated, if I may ask?
10.
Wow.
I was 10, and I'm an only child.
That's a pretty sort of tender, impressionable age.
Yeah, I was very fortunate, though. My maternal grandfather was very involved, and he was worked in the post office, and he retired, and I spent a lot of time together. So he was sort of a great guide, and nothing wrong with my parents. They just it was the 80s. They just didn't get along. And so they just really didn't. And so I had two goals in life. And one was never to live anywhere near my hometown again as long as I lived. And that was easy. I went off to university and that was the end of that. But the second was to write for the New York Times. So by the time we got to 2013, I'd been a New York Times columnist for 5 years. My first book had come out. It did really well. It introduced me to the world of keynote speaking, sort of corporate speaking, moderating panels. I had two daughters at that point. My wife.
So you already a dad when you started working for New York Times?
I became a dad the year after. So I became a columnist for I got married in 2007, became a New York Times columnist in 2008, and became a father in 2009. So each year got better. Right. Each year got better than the next. And then 2010, my first book came out. So those 4 years, it just kind of went, one after the other. Yep. And my career was better. My life, everything was better than I ever imagined it being, and I was just so full of gratitude. And my wife in 2013, she works in financial services in so the asset management industry, and she came to me and said, I want to start my own firm. And I said, you 100% have to. Like, you're really great at what you do. Plus, like, I can't, like, this is amazing to me. Like, my life is great. You're great. Everything's great. Like, I will support this. And she said, all right, but I'm going to be working a lot in the beginning. I'm going to be working all the time. I was like, don't worry about it. And she said, well, what are you going to do with the girls? And I said, I'll become the lead dad. And that's what I meant. We just kind of threw it out there. And what it meant was I became the go-to parent.
Sure.
But I live in outside of New York City today. I live about an hour outside of New York City. It's a commuter town. Everybody lives here because they take the train into New York.
Sure.
I don't think you'd live here otherwise. You live here to be close to New York. Yeah. And you look around my town, and most of the caregiving was done by moms or paid caregivers, nannies, au pairs, babysitters.
If people could afford it, yep.
Yeah. Yep. And that was, you didn't see a lot of men during the day in this role. And at the same time, like, my dream was to work at the New York Times. And I didn't want to really say to, any of my editors, even though many of them were parents, I didn't want to say to any of them that, hey, I'm also a lead dad. So I say that from 2013 until COVID hit, I was an undercover lead dad, which is a ridiculous thing in retrospect, because why would you be undercover about being a super involved father who's supportive of your spouse while still working at a high level? Those are all three very good things, but culturally, I felt that I couldn't be open about it. Now, this speaks as much to my own, sort of insecurity as it does to, cultural norms, but they're sort of playing against one another. And everything went pretty well. Like,
so for the whole time, you would never talk to anybody saying, I'm caregiving, I need to go back home, and all of those things that you needed to do.
It's funnier than that. It's funnier than that. There's this moment in 2015, 2016, I'm talking to this woman who'd worked in the White House. She'd been a cabinet official under Bill Clinton. She now runs one of the big business schools in the United States. And I was talking to her in the passenger seat of my car, outside of the ballet studio, because one of my daughters is doing ballet day. Now, she doesn't know where I am. This is before Zoom, so she just thinks, she assumes that she's talking to me in the New York Times office. I don't say, hey, oh, by the way, I'm in my car.
Outside the ballet studio.
Outside the ballet studio, wondering if I'm going to go get ice cream across the street when this call is over. And I'm talking, and it's going fine until my other daughter, my dad takes my other daughter to the pediatrician, until the pediatrician is calling me. Now, I'm sure this is the same in India. I think it's a global phenomenon. Whenever the pediatrician calls you, you must answer the phone.
You just hang up everything and answer the call.
You won't hear from the person again. They disappear. They literally disappear. Like, where did you go? And so now I'm faced with this conundrum. Senior White House, official, a pediatrician. And as a pediatrician. Yeah, but then she's calling me back. She's calling me back because nobody has hung up on this woman in 30 years. Like, she is so important, so senior. Nobody hangs up on her. And so when I get back on the phone, like, what am I going to say to her? Like, I'm a New York Times columnist. I can't lie to her. So I was like, I think quickly. I was like, all right, I'm very sorry that happened. The cell phone service in my town is awful. Where were we? And so all of that stuff was true. I was sorry I had to drop the call. Had I been moving around in my town, the cell phone service is very bad. I happened to be sitting, in my car, so it didn't matter. And then we just carried on. If that happened today,
fascinating. Yeah.
If that happened today, we'd be able to be honest about that, or at least have a degree of honesty and say, and that's what COVID did. But back then I didn't feel I could do it. And so this goes along, to sort of speed the story up. This goes along until, COVID sends all of us in the United States and inside. We're all working from home.
All over the world.
But my career, the whole world. But my career keeps building up. The second book comes out. The third daughter comes along. I take on more responsibility at the New York Times. On the other side of the ledger, my wife's firm is doing really well. She's got 5 or 6 employees. She's happy. Everything's happy. And then in COVID, it just doesn't work anymore. Because to be this undercover lead dad, my kids needed to be in school. And if they weren't in school, they went to a day camp, a summer camp near our house for 7-8 weeks in the summer. And then all the rest of the time, we could balance it out. And it was that was the moment when I really thought, okay, this isn't sustainable.
Right.
I'm as busy as I possibly could be at the New York Times. My wife is super busy because she thinks, honestly, like most people in March and April of 2020, is the world going to end? What's going to happen? Not so many unknowns. And
That's
so
right.
I don't want to burden her with anything that I'm feeling. So, I go online and I say, there has to be something for men like me. And there wasn't. There's lots of stuff for moms. All the stuff for parents in the U.S. is really for moms. And the stuff for dads are dads in some form of distress. Bad divorce, drink too much, drugs, incarcerated, and I was like, that's not for me. And so I did what a journalist would do. And I said, I wonder how many dads fit this definition of lead dads, at least in the United States. And that was the aha moment. There were 25 million men. A third of all fathers fit my definition of lead dad. And we were able to prove that with all the data from the U.S. Census Bureau, Bureau of Labor Statistics, Pew. And that was really the moment where I was like, I've got to figure this out. And so I started talking to more people, talking to working moms. And this kind of carries on for about, a year and a half. And then finally my wife says, you think about this all the time. You have 3 daughters. You're a lead dad. You're super involved. You've allowed my career to take off. You had a great career. Why don't you take a risk? Why don't you do something? And it was really because of her that I left the New York Times at the end of 21 and launched the company Dad in February of 22.
That's incredible. What a great story, Paul. Thanks for sharing. And there's definitely a little bit of a common thread between that story and my story of why I got involved in this space. And of course, it's a much more nascent journey than yours. So I became a dad in 2011, and we were living in Los Angeles, actually. I used to work for Disney, and we moved there in 2008, just like your story. 2008, I moved there. 2010, everything crashed, actually, if you remember, the financial crisis. So we went.
Oh, yeah, of course I remember.
And my wife actually worked in the financial services business. So she worked at Merrill Lynch. Anyways, we became pregnant, and we had our son in 2011. And of course, we had no family, so we had to basically do everything between her and me, and that's what got me started in my fatherhood journey. So that basically, and I personally, I have a story of my dad. My mom and dad are not separated, but my dad was a classic 80s dad, so a provider, just gone for most parts of the week. So I had this thing about my own fatherhood that I need to get more involved. So when we moved back, are you still able to hear me? I see a bit of.
I am. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, no, I hear you great. Yeah.
Yeah. So when we moved back to India in 2015, I looked around, and again, there's a lot of moms networks, a lot of, that as it is, all around the world, and didn't find really a common forum or a way to connect with dads, and that's what kind of inspired me to start this podcast. And it took a few years, and I started interviewing exactly during the COVID time, and then launched this in 2023. So there's a little bit of common thread, as you can see.
100%. I think, I say this all the time, that as parents, we can say whatever we want to say, but our kids are really watching what we're doing. And the more men I talk to who are lead dads, almost to a T, they've done it because they either had a dad who was able to be super involved at a time when that was more difficult, or a dad who they knew loved him. Not saying that the dad didn't love them, but it was a different world. And I thought, boy, I would like to do something, differently. And the data here, Boston College, has all this data on working families, and they started showing before COVID, at least in the United States, 2012, 2013, some of these really big companies, the American Expresses of the world, were offering paternity leave for men. So they don't obviously always have maternity leave, but they started offering paternity leave. Now, what these companies didn't expect is they didn't expect that men would actually take the time off. They only offered it because they thought it would look good and that nobody would take it. Well,
how much did they offer?
They took it, and it all varied. You know, it's not really, 12 weeks. It was never on par with the maternity leave, but something was better than zero, or your vacation or your sick days or something like that. And so as these men started taking it in 2013, 2014, these companies were shocked. And they're like, well, why are they doing this? We never did this. And then they did what good companies do is they ask people like, why did you do this? And they're like, well, you told me I could do it. I wanted to be involved as a dad. I wanted to help my wife as she recovered physically. And oh, by the way, thank you for offering this. I've had other job offers, but I'm not leaving because I really appreciate the policies that this company has. So inadvertently, some of the top 100 companies in the United States, inadvertently, they created this policy that not only had great benefits to their workforce, both men and women, but actually helped them retain key workers and instill this way better than if they'd given them a 3% raise or a 5% raise or a $10,000 bonus. And the people stayed. And then they think, And so it was by accident that these companies realized just how valuable paternity leave was and how much men wanted to be involved. And had that but this is all pre-COVID. And so, as I say often, like, what did COVID do? It simply accelerated trends that were already happening. And once people were forced to work from home, who weren't sort of frontline workers, people who could work from home, they said, wait a second, I don't want to miss all this. I want to find a way to still be highly productive and have a real role in the lives of my family.
Yeah, I mean, again, another common part of the story that I share with you is my wife started a business on her own as well in LA. She started an interior design business, and when we moved back to India in Bangalore, she's had to get that started. So I did have to play a bit of a active role in taking care of kids. We have two children, a son and a daughter, and they were younger, so I had to play a bigger role as she was working through growing her business. I remember back in 2015, I was having a conversation with someone at lunch, and I told them I need to go back home to put the baby for nap, and I could see a surprise in their eyes, right? Like, in the middle of the workday, you're going to go home and put your baby to nap, and that's still how. And again, pre-COVID, right? And that's still how alien this idea was back then. Thanks for sharing, but I think one of the questions that I'm keen to learn is, how did that change you, being an involved dad, being a lead dad over the last several years, as who you were? And more importantly, what have you seen as you worked through with so many dads, millions of dads? What has that told you about masculinity as it it used to be known, and what did it really tell you about masculinity?
So many things are. So I'll kind of break down to three things. Like, how it changed me, I wouldn't say it really changed me, at all. It allowed me, launching the company of dads allowed me to go public with something I had already been doing. And so, my oldest daughter is 15. I have three daughters. My oldest one is 15 years old. And people always they'll make stupid comments. They're like, oh, you got a teenager, that must be tough. Does she even talk to you? I was like, actually, I have a great relationship with her. Many nights a week, I'll sit on the edge of her bed or sit in the chair in her room and we'll talk. Like, oh, how do you do that, man? I was like, well, I started sitting there with her when she was a newborn, and I put her to bed. And then, when she was 3 and I had time and she wanted to go outside and go on the swing, I'd go out and push her on the swing for 10 minutes and I'd get back to work. And it was sort of an iterative process. That's right. Yeah, you can't just parachute in.
Correct.
And so that was important, to go public on that. The second part of your question, a 3-part question, the second part is about masculinity. And I was very aware of this early on, and why I selected the term, lead dad, because lead dad, it's kind of a nonsense term. Like, what does that even mean? Right. But having the word lead in it is important because it's proactive. It's powerful. It's not, the flip side. And, we have some lead dads who are what is historically been called stay-at-home dads. We call them lead dads who devote all their time to their families. But I hate that term because, like, if you're a parent, you're not ever really staying home. You're active. You're out there, and you want to lead. You want to set an example for yourself, for your friends, for your children. So we use that term. But early on, when I launched the podcast, when I created a board of advisors, one of the first guys I got on the board is this pretty well-known American football player named Najee Good. He played for the Philadelphia Eagles, years ago. When they won a Super Bowl, playing against the New England Patriots. The most famous athlete in the United States at that time is Tom Brady, and he famously sacks Tom Brady, knocks him down on the field, helps the team win the Super Bowl. I had become friends with Najee randomly, and I said, will you be part of this? And he is a single lead dad. He's always a lead dad. His wife is unfortunately not in the picture. She had some health challenges, but he has full custody of his two daughters, and he is. These guys are absolutely massive. They are as masculine as they can possibly be.
That's the epitome of masculinity, right? Like
that's right. Absolutely.
An NFL player. Yep.
An NFL player. Yep. And in the United States, like something around 93 or 94 of the 100 most watched shows every year are all NFL football games.
Correct.
They dominate the Super Bowl every single year.
Most watched,
the number one.
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah.
And here he is with, obviously all girls start out as little girls, and he's holding them because he can hold both of them in his arms because he's this massive man. And he got into it, and he introduced me to these other football players. And
that's amazing.
It was a really great way to start because we could say, look, you're not more masculine than this guy. Like, look, this guy, like, you're not. And he's a lead dad. So who are you kidding? Like let's stop joking. And then the third part of your question is like, what do I enjoy about it? What's it been like? And I'd say the most amazing thing is not, the corporate work pays the bills, and I love it. I love working with companies. I love our partnerships. And that is super impactful if we're going to keep going, because you got to make money, but also if you're going to change the conversation. But the thing that makes me happiest is when I'll get a message on LinkedIn or a message on Instagram from some guy I've never met before in my entire life who's been following what we're doing. And he says, Paul, thanks for doing this. I never knew what to call myself before, but I'm a lead dad. And then
that's beautiful.
I say, come on, let's talk. And we have this feature every week called the Lead Dad of the Week. And that thing just fuels itself. I don't have to go out and look for people. They just come to me. And that's that one-on-one connection of like, this is meaningful to this individual. And the tough thing about men is it's tough for us to reach out. It's tough for us to reach out and say something like super positive. Like, it's easy to joke with your buddies, or you're going to watch sports together, go out for dinner, drink, whatever, to actually reach out and say something heartfelt. And so like, if one person is doing it, probably 3 or 4 people a week are doing it. How many, if you extrapolate from that, that's hundreds of people each week that are starting to think differently about themselves and start saying, hey, I'm a lead dad, and this is a good thing to do. And that's easily the thing I'm most proud of.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It definitely resonates with me. That's the same thing I'm experiencing here. I've been in the field of human resources for my entire life, and I've been proud of my career, and still I'm very, very, motivated to continue to do good work on that space. But the thing that really tugs at me, when, like you said, somebody says, hey, I listened to that conversation you had with the other dad, and it made me rethink a little bit about how I am, doing my fatherhood. And that one thing will motivate me further, because sometimes you feel as if you are making a difference, if it makes sense to anybody, if it really means anything to anyone, and then one thing that comes along and you're like, I must be onto something, and you get inspired.
Yeah, 100%.
Yep. Moving on to the company of dads, it serves 25 million fathers in the US, which is a huge, cohort of dads that you're serving. I know we talked about why do men struggle to embrace this role, but could you sort of dig into that a little bit in terms of why do men struggle in terms of just embracing this role?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of expectations and gender stereotypes. It's the same, it's a story that's not wholly dissimilar anywhere in the world, is that there is this expectation. And when we started talking, you talked about your dad as the sort of classic 1980s provider. And oftentimes I'll do, talks. Often, HR executives bring me in to do these talks. And I always ask people what the word provider means to them. And without fail, the majority of the men in the audience will give some version of, I need to go out and make money. And I said, I'm not saying that that's not correct, but that is a very limited definition of provider. What if you redefine provider as caregiver, as supporter, as person who's able to take half an hour and go get an ice cream with his son or daughter? What if you think of provider as, the person who gets up a little bit early and makes the breakfast, who comes home a little bit early to sit on the bedside and read a book? And it's really eye-opening when you say, like, you kind of force people to redefine that term provider. Now, how do we get in this situation? We get in this situation because we've just kind of gone along. We've gone along seeing, one model. And look, any working mom who's listening to this story will say, cry me a river. And they're absolutely correct in saying that. They're gender stereotypes that work the other way, that women cannot be, hugely successful in business, can't be hugely successful executives, that the caregiving must fall to them. And of course, anybody, you and I would say, well, why is that? That makes no sense. I say this most days, somebody will ask me this, and at some point my answer comes back, there are only two things that moms can do that dads cannot do. A mom can carry a child for 9 months and give birth. And if she so chooses, she can breastfeed. She
can breastfeed, yep.
Other than that, moms and dads are interchangeable, and people kind of chafe at this until they think for a second. And so the hard part for men is, getting past it. Now, when you talk about, the company of dads and that 25 million number, it really is, 3 cohorts of men.
Gotcha.
And I'll start with the worst to the best. 60 to 70, largely write them off, unless they have children in their 30s who are doing this. They honestly don't get what we're doing. Now, it's not entirely true. We've had some, call OG lead dads come on, but it's a totally different generation. Men like me, you in our 40s and 50s, who started questioning this, who started saying, wait a second, I want to be more involved. How can I be more involved? I know that when I first started working as a journalist, I just went to the office every single day and I didn't think anything of it because that was the only model I had. I didn't know what else would I do? I didn't even think, in any other way. And of course, as you get more senior, you get some success, and then COVID, of course, changes everything. But the key demographic here are those parents, in their 30s who are new parents. And for them, it is the most natural thing to work and live differently. Many of them, if you think about it, came of age during, the global financial crisis in 2008. And that changed fundamentally the way they thought about work. But they also saw their own parent when they were in secondary school and in university.
Struggle.
They also saw their own struggle and struggle tremendously. And that broke something in them, or it shifted something in them to them saying, wait a second. I can't go and, work for Disney for my entire life. I can't go and work for the New York Times for my entire life. Something could change. I don't want to give everything and not have something for my family. Now, where some executives get this wrong is they say, well, no, that generation is not motivated. They want everything. It's like, that's just not true. They want to work in a different way, and they want to be more intentional, and they want to focus. And to them, it's not, the classic work-life balance. It's life. It's life.
That's
right.
And
how do you then slice up the hours you have in a day, the days you have in a week, the weeks you have in a year? And it's just asking different questions, just as productive as anybody else, but they're going to be there for their parents. And that's the group that makes me the most hopeful. That's the group that's going to sustain the company of dads, for 10, 20 years, because they just want to live and work differently. And they want the resources that I believe, we're providing.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I think this I see a lot of new generation of dads, and particularly the dads in their 30s that you mentioned. I talk to them, and I get really excited about their involvement and how the roles they're playing, and it's good on many levels, right? For themselves, for the children, for their partners, and for the workplace and the communities. Like you take a look at it from any lens, and there's benefits. It's just that it's not really appreciated as much, but I'm pretty sure over the next years, 10 to 20 years, it'll get more and more appreciated, even by the employers.
It will by the employers, because the employers will see that they have these super productive workers who are working differently than they did, and why would they want to lose this? I tell the story that where I live, the house behind me, there's a guy just turned 90, and he worked for, this is, listeners who still remember, he worked for a guy named Sandy Weil in financial. And Sandy Weil created Citigroup.
Yep.
That's right.
Yep.
Sandy Weil created Citibank. And my next door neighbor was, one of Sandy Weil's, 10, 15, 20 very important managers. And so at one point in the 1980s, Sandy Weil went to my neighbor and said, his name is Jack. He said, Jack, you are crucial. We are going to put a telephone line in your house. So when you leave your desk and take the train home from New York to your house in Connecticut, you will have a dedicated telephone line there where we can call you. Now, Jack thinks this is the greatest thing ever because he has really made it. They are putting a telephone line in his house.
That's hilarious.
Amazing. Because shows his wife, shows his kids, like a telephone line. And imagine, and I say this because 40 years ago, if Citibank had maintained those same policies and somebody becomes a managing director and they're like, okay, Jack Jr., you finally gotten to this level, and guess what? We're sending the telephone company out and they're going to install a landline in your house so you'd be like, what in the world are you? I've had this thing called the iPhone. And you're like, no, this is what we do. Sandy Weil created this, and you can pick any color you want for the phone. It will be right there. And you're like, I'm leaving. These people are crazy. And I tell this because now people are like, at
hilarious.
This point in the evolution, people are trying to think like, well, how are people going to work? What are they going to do? It's like, this is just a management challenge. The obstacle, I believe, is often managers not being pushed or unwilling to think differently. But the people who managed people in the 1980s and installed telephones in their house would not be employing the same management strategies that they are today, with a generation that's very mobile, very connected, very wired. And so once we can start to change those management techniques and those expectations, I think that what we're talking about here will not become it will not be as rare. It'll become a lot more commonplace.
Yeah, absolutely. So true. I was just picturing a bunch of people walking in and with a big telephone and starting
exactly. It'd be like, in Despicable Me, that movie Despicable Me, it'd be like the Minions all coming in. Like, what, the Minions are attacking my house? What are they doing? All these short yellow people. What's happening? The Minions. Oh no.
That's right. In terms of, I know you talked about between dad and mom, dads can pretty much do everything. One of the things that and I'm not sure how much you experience this in the same spirit of even doing things with children. Of course, there's the stereotypes of, well, dads can just play with kids and they can, they do the dad thing, right? And moms can do the nurturing and the emotional and all of that stuff, right? But there's also something to be thought about dads expressing themselves, right? You say you sit with your daughter like when she was 3, 5, 7 throughout her entire, so toddler to childhood to teenage. How have you seen her connecting with you on even emotional levels, right? Like she's struggling with something. And there's a stereotype. The stereotype is like, well, go talk to your mom, right? But, there's a specific role that dads can express themselves as well. And there's something about dads sharing their emotional side and having this conversation. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense. And, in some cases, do moms and dads parent in a different way? Of course they do. But is that necessarily a bad thing? No, it's not. Look at any sport in the world. Look at football. Look at cricket. Not everybody plays the sport the same way, but they each have a skill level. Yeah. I'll give you an example that happened to me 2 nights ago. I was downstairs answering some emails, just kind of winding down, and I knew that my oldest daughter was studying for her exams. She has these sort of midterm exams at her school. And they're important, and she knows they're important, and she has been studying for several weeks. So she's not, she took them very seriously. I'm very proud of how hard she worked. And she came down ahead of the math exam. She still had a day to go. And she was just in that anxiety loop. She's in that anxiety loop that kids get into, but guess what? Sure. Adults get into it too.
Yep. A bit of a panic mode. Yeah.
A bit of a panic mode. Like, do I know this? Do I not know this? What do I do? And it's like, I said, okay. I didn't say, all right, go wake your mother up, or go do, go email you, go text your friend or something. I said, okay, let's think this through. What do we know? And at first I said, okay, I named what was going on. I didn't try to diminish what she was feeling. I said, okay, you're in an anxiety loop right now. This is why you're in an anxiety loop. It happens to everybody. It's totally natural. Don't worry about it. However, it's not very productive. So let's think about what we know. Okay, all right, I'm fine. Why don't you think you know this? Okay, she walks me through. I say, okay, well, I don't know if I'm, at this point, terribly skilled in teaching geometry. So what are our options here? And she said, well, the teacher is offering extra help tomorrow after our English exam. I'm going to go to that. I said, okay, that sounds very good. And then I thought, all right, do you think you need more than that? And she says, well, I don't know. I'll see how it goes. Well, just so happens that my middle daughter has a math tutor every couple weeks come, and dumb luck, that math tutor is coming the next day. And I said, how about you ask your sister if you can borrow her math tutor?
Oh, that's
cool. I'll be embarrassed. What will she say? It's like, she won't care. She's an adult who teaches in a school just like yours, and she teaches math. This is what she does. She teaches kids math all day, every day. And then slowly she started to get, her confidence back. And then what I also said was, I think you need to stop doing this. I think you need to go watch a show. It was nighttime, so I couldn't say go out and take a walk, but sure. I think you need to go pick one of your fun little shows, watch it for 30 minutes, and then go to bed. And, we just sort of worked through it to the point where, every day for her exam, she wanted me to be the one to drive her, because I would give her a little pep talk, or I'd just talk through things, or I'd tell some stories from when I remember the exam. And when she had the math exam, I had, honestly, quite an important phone call for some work, for some corporate work. But as I always say, you can't be the founder of the company of dads and then check out as a lead dad.
That role, absolutely.
Yeah. So I named it on the call. I said, I know we've had this call in the books for a while. It took a lot to get everybody together. But I'm going to have to cut it short by about 10 minutes because, and I explained to them what I was going to do, and everybody said, oh, okay, well, that makes total sense. And that's something that, you asked a personal question, that's something I could not have done in 2015 when I was talking to a former White House cabinet official.
Yeah.
Now,
you could
in 2025,
get your courage to tell her that, hey, my pediatrician is calling me. Give me a couple of minutes.
Right. Yep. Which is not the craziest thing. Like everybody, and this woman gets everybody's pediatrician calls. Happens to everybody anywhere in the world. And by naming it, one, I said, okay, I'm walking the walk, I'm talking the talk to this corporate partner. And then at the same time, I got to take my daughter to school. And, she came home today. Does she think she got an A+ on the math exam? No. But does she think she did a lot better than she was going to do, 2 nights ago? Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
That's a lovely story.
Like you're saying, that's just saying like, and would my wife have been able to soothe her? 100%.
Of course.
Would she have done it in a slightly different way? Probably.
Yep.
Would it have the same outcome? I'm sure it would have.
Right.
But, that's just you stepping in like in the moment. It's 9:00 at night. I'm awake. Nobody else is. Let's work it through.
That's a beautiful story. Yeah, I mean, it should not be construed as if you're trying to take on somebody else's role, but you just do it differently, and both these styles matter, right? Like you said, in a team sport.
Yeah. And what is that going to do for our children, whether we have sons or daughters, when they see both mom and dad being, deeply involved in parenting? They're going to take that into their own lives.
Right.
Be it how they're going to be, if your son, how your son is going to be when he one day becomes a father, or the flip side, your daughter, what she may one day look for in a husband and a partner and the father of her children. So we're setting an example, either gender, we're setting a really positive example that, okay, it can be different. When you think about you and I, you telling the story, we kind of broke out of a mold of this expectation of 1980s dads who did things in a certain way because that's the only way they knew
that's right.
how to do it. And so, while I'm really proud that, we're helping 25 million men in the United States who are lead dads, there's still another 50 million men who are not.
Who are not there yet.
So this isn't, they're not there yet.
Yeah.
And so, but hopefully, hopefully those 30-somethings come along and they get there more quickly than our generation did.
Yeah. I was touched by when you say, you're doing this work on behalf of Company of Dads. You set up this call. And then you had to really ask yourself, even if it's for the service of the Company of Dads, am I playing the role of as a dad myself? And I've come across this situation many times. Like I'll get busy in like podcasts and talk this stuff, and of course serving this larger cause. But I have to remind myself that if it's Saturday morning, I should keep my time free to spend time with children and do something with them, because I can get completely carried away by this mission of podcast or whatever. So it's very important to kind of keep the basics in place, right? That why you're doing it in the first place.
Plus, this as a dad. I mean, children are like hypocrisy-seeking missiles. If they see that we're, preaching one thing to the world and then doing something different, they go right there. And so
you told me that you should not be having Coke, and now you're drinking this. How does that work?
That's right.
The other day, my son wanted to watch a football game. Football, as in soccer, right?
Soccer.
Yeah. And he had to wake up at 1:30 in the morning because Liverpool and PSG playing. And he said, I told him, you can watch the game, but don't pull a Coke from the fridge. He said, well, can I have a kombucha, right? Like he tried to soften it down. Yeah. I'm like, no, but that's sugar. At 3 in the morning, like your body does not need sugar. But he wouldn't give up. It's like, but like when we watched that game together, you did this. And I'm like, okay, I kept going, and I said, okay, I'm not going to let this slide. But eventually he's like, can I eat something? Can I eat some chips? I'm like, okay, you can eat some chips. But eventually I said, okay, you can have the kombucha. It's not the end of the day, end of the world at all. So you're absolutely right. They remember and they'll catch you.
Oh, yeah. And they're so good at negotiating, and they just keep, tapping away at us to see if they can get something. Yeah. So I love that.
Well, they'll keep you honest for sure.
They will.
Yeah. Now let's go, getting back to sort of, and we're about 10 minutes away from wrapping up.
No, I'm having fun talking. We can talk as long as you want to talk to me. We'll keep going.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that I'm, again, continuing with nudging dads, right, who are on the fence, right? You said there's 50 million dads out there who not necessarily don't want to be involved. Like that's one of the things that I have realized, that it's not like dads do not want to be involved. Sometimes they need a little bit of a nudge, a little bit of the door to open to get inside, right? So what advice would you give? What are some of the tools that you would give to dads who are still are sort of more on the identity of I'm working, and it's a real struggle. I face that every day. I've joined a new job and I've not really fully expressed myself of who I am. As you know, it takes time to kind of come to your full authentic self in a new role, in a new company. And I see a lot of men, struggling, not really expressing about what they want to do. If there's something at home, what tools have you used or have you seen dads use to have that vocabulary or have that ability to express their needs at home and to sort of balance their roles and the identities?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I can answer it on a couple different levels. When I was sort of thinking about starting the company of dads during COVID, I read the sociologist who sort of talked about one of the big struggles for men is that we often communicate shoulder to shoulder. And the opposite of that is the sociologist drew the comparison that women communicate face to face. And so you can have this image of somebody two women having a cup of tea, or two men sitting on a couch watching a football game together. And that is sort of a fundamental difference in communication style. So we set up the Company of Dads to sort of meet people where they are. So we have a whole bunch of stuff that you can just consume passively. You watch the podcast, you read the newsletter, you can read the Lead Dad of the Week. You got a question, you go to our Lead Dad library. It tells you all kinds of tips about being a father. That's one level. Second level is we have community. You can join every month. We have an online meetup. You can come and join, and every time we do it, it's
actually a real-time conversation.
Yeah, real-time conversation, but it's online, so you can be wherever you are. Usually, anytime, so it doesn't matter. But every month, we'll have a handful of new people, but more and more people who've been there in the past who are getting something out of it. A couple times a year we have an in-person event. That's obviously a lot more. Then you're actually, you're putting yourself out there as, a lead dad. So that's the kind of, steps we do. Because I'll tell you the story. When I left the New York Times, they asked me to write a final column that ran in the first section of the paper. And it was about, essentially, why are you leaving your job? Like, this is a weird thing to do. Like, I wasn't fired. Like, most people don't walk away from a nice job like that.
Not from New York Times for sure.
No, yeah. And so I said, I'm going to go pursue, my other career, that of being a lead dad. And this guy who I've known in my town 10 years, daughters around the same age, see him at games, see him at the town pool, see him, getting pizza or something like that. He comes up to me after a game in the fall and he says, I want to be part of what you're doing, but can I be part of it without you using my name? And I kind of looked at him like, I kind of joked and I said, you may have seen, he worked in real estate. His wife is a corporate attorney. And I said, maybe you saw like an early document that we drafted, but we got rid of the initiation where you had to throw a puppy into the pond. We thought that was really off brand. We thought that would scare the kids. And he kind of stared at me, not laughing at all. And he said, no. I don't want the people I work with to know that I'm the lead dad. Now, he had a good job. His wife had this job where she had to commute into the city all the time. She's very busy.
Well, how long ago was that, Paul?
3 years ago. 3.5 years ago. So this is not
like 2000 or 2010, right?
No. But that is not uncommon. I'll have guys who will come to me and they'll want to talk, and I'll say, "Hey, are you okay being a lead dad of the week?" And they say, "No. I'm a little afraid. Like, what will it look like if I want a promotion? If I need to get another job?" One case, this guy said, "Oh, I may need to raise money for my company. I don't want people to see this." And Thanks so I back off. You can only push people so far. Now, how does that part change? As I said, people are coming to us willingly to get this information, but then you find people like that who sort of pull back a little bit.
Yeah.
What helps change? Well, that's why we do so much work with companies, because when you can get, managers in a company to message that HR plan, as you know this, working in HR, you could spend gajillions of dollars creating the world's most beautiful HR plan with the most wonderful benefits, as equitable as that they could ever be crafted. But it only takes a couple of jerks, a couple of managers with retrograde views who say, "Well, man,
to destroy the whole thing."
Are you really going to do that? Are you really going to take that time off? I didn't take that time off. Really? What are you going to do? You're a dad. And it all goes downhill. And so we work with them to message to the managers, but we also work to sort of inspire other managers or other employees to sort of put things on their calendars that are honest. Instead of putting, in the United States, I'm sure you use the same there, out of office. Instead of just putting the blanket up there, say, I'm,
daughter's soccer game or whatever. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Just be, and we've shown this. We've done research. We've had people on who say that makes a difference. And there's one guy who worked at a big financial services firm, wanted to take his son to school every day. Financial services firm based in New York. He lives in Portland, Oregon, so 3 hours time difference. He put it, I'm going to take my son to work, then I'll send to school, then I'll be available to work the rest of the day. Well, in the beginning, people would call him. They didn't believe him. So he would just say, "No, I'm taking my son to school." So, okay, they respected it. Then they started texting him. Then they started emailing him. He ignored all of that, and he kept it on his calendar that, 3 or 4 days a week, he was taking his son to school. What did that do? Well, it was good for him as a human being. He had time with his son, but it was better for all those people who weren't a partner at that firm. Like, they couldn't fire this guy. He was too senior. Nobody's going to fire him. But it was better. It was so good for all those people beneath him, both men and women, who started reaching out to him. So he became this unlikely or inadvertent,
hero.
Parental hero.
Ambassador,
And they're like, "Man, you did it. And once you did it, I realized I could do it too." And now he's getting all these calls from people. And now, the other partners in the firm are like, "What's going on here?" It's like, look, these people were doing this anyway. They were just doing it secretly. Now you're allowing them to be honest about what they're doing. Give them permission.
Yep.
Yeah. And they are going to be more loyal to our company going forward. If we ask them to work longer hours occasionally to get a project done, they're not going to balk because we don't give them a hard time when they sneak out, or not sneak out, when they go out at like 1 o'clock in the afternoon, go see something at their child's school, and then start back working again at 2:30. And when you can do that, that's really giving men and women, permission to be fully involved parents.
So that's beautiful. Thanks for sharing this couple of anecdotes, because this really brings this to life, right? Otherwise, we can talk in theories and concepts for the rest of our lives. So your advice is for particularly men, dads, to be who they are and try and express whatever they're doing guilt-free, right?
Yeah.
The first time might be hard, right? Because you're breaking out of the mold, as you said. Yeah. But that could set off a chain reaction that could actually not only benefit you, and you can flourish out of that moment, but you can also inspire other dads to do that.
And it's okay if you take, baby steps. It's okay if you're, looking at the company of dad stuff anonymously, just trying to learn something. We have here in the United States this group of, many groups of crazy people in the United States, but this one particular group of crazy people comes to mind. They're the Polar Bear Club. And the Polar Bear Club are people who, in the northern part of the United States, when it's very cold in the winter, they will run into the ocean. Yep. And the ocean is freezing cold, and they'll go in there. And I've never done this because it looks absolutely miserable. But, you don't become, some people are natural born members of the Polar Bears Club, and the first time they go running in. Yep. But most people are not like that. Most people go up to the edge of the water and say, whew, that's cold. I mean, we have that phrase, you just dip a toe in. Dip a toe in. And they gradually work up to the point where, they feel comfortable being a polar bear. Maybe they only ever go into their knees. Maybe they only ever go into their waist. Yep. But that's farther than they would have gone otherwise. And that's what we're trying to inspire, lead dads to do. Go into your own comfort level. Maybe you'll get in all the way. Sure. But guess what? Up to your knees is better than just standing on the shore and
outside
watching
the water. Yeah. That's really good advice. Absolutely. And I've seen that happen. You just start small, and maybe you'll fail, right? But at least you've said what you had to say, and then that'll give you more courage to do something else later on.
Yeah, and we all know this. I had this guy on who. He worked at a big tech company in Canada, huge job, and was working all the time, had 2 kids, and he has a heart attack. One of those heart attacks, this kind of mythical heart attack where you see your whole life flash before you. Like they come in with the defibrillators, he gets in. And I said to him, because obviously I was talking to him, he didn't die. And I said to him, I got to ask you a serious question. Yeah. If people ask me serious questions about this, I'm like, okay. When they were putting the defibrillators on you, when you heard them yell clear, when they're about to shock you, were you thinking about PowerPoint presentations and Excel spreadsheets? And he just starts laughing. He's like, no, I was thinking about my wife and my kids. I was like, of course you were. Of course you were. And like nobody on their deathbed thinks, okay, I wish I'd spent less time with my family. I wish I had been less involved. And this guy was a wonderful story. They end up having, he lives, they have a third child, a daughter, and his boss comes to him and says, you know what? Maybe this job is too big for you. Maybe you don't need to be the CTO. And he said, you know what? Yep. No offense to people who do other jobs, but I know myself. I can't take a lesser role. It's not the job. It's me. Like I need to change who I am. And so he continued being a CTO, but he learned how to delegate. He learned how to find time to sort of be with his family. He ate a little bit better. He exercised a little bit more, but he learned who he was. And I think that is so crucial. When we can become comfortable in our own skin, when we can learn who we are, then we can be, the lead dad, the parent, the worker, the human that we're meant to be.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny you talked about that example because there's this book called The 5 Regrets of the Dying by this Australian hospice worker, and that became, I'm blanking out on her name, but she says exactly, she met hundreds of people dying, of course, at the hospice, and she came up with the top 5 regrets, and none of them said what you said. None of them said, I wished I made another 3 PowerPoint presentations, or for that matter, I wish I had another couple $1 million. They all said, I wish I had spent more time with my kids and my children, my dad, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, we will start to wind down, Paul. It's been a blast, and I'm just thinking about other opportunities to kind of stay connected with your mission and not have this as just a one-off conversation. But to go back to your point of the company of dads, I know it's mostly focused in the U.S., but we can access this content from India.
100%. Yep.
So, what are the resources that you have? We can tell our audience that they can access as well here in India. I'm sure you have a global audience. I don't know if you measure if folks are reading your stuff or listening to stuff from India, but I'm pretty sure there's a lot of active listeners and consumers of content around parenting in India as well.
Yeah, we have a lot of people in India, a lot of people in Australia, Canada, and the UK. So we see that. And for a while, I don't know why, because it's an English language site. We had a lot of people in Japan. So I never really figured that one out yet. But you want to access, the landing page, thecompanyofdads.com, and we say to people, like, if you want to, you get flooded with so much, maybe you go down a rabbit hole one day and you see all the stuff there, that's great. But if you want to sort of stay abreast and gradually sort of learn what's going on, sign up for our newsletter, The Dad. And so it's thecompanyofdads.com/The Dad. Comes once a week, Sunday morning, early, that's it. We don't send any more. The Dad, yeah. Companydads.com/The Dad. Sign up for it, try it out, and only once a week. We never send it more, and then it gives you, some obviously some weeks are better than others, but it gives you, food for thought, and it sees what's going, you see what's going on in the world of dads.
That's great. Thanks for sharing. So the Company of Dads /The Dad newsletter.
The Company Dad, yeah. Thecompanydads.com/The Dad.
There you go. I'll definitely check it out and then sign up for the newsletter as well. My last two questions: what are your goals and dreams as a father at this point, with 3 daughters growing up? And then what is the same for your mission, the Company of Dads?
My goals and dreams for my daughters, it's never changed, is to be as present with them as I can, and to know that when I'm with them, there are moments like we're human. That's why we're called humans. We make mistakes, and there are moments where I will just get up, whatever we're doing, and I will take my phone that's beeping, buzzing, whatever, and I'll put it far away, and then I'll come back and I'll sit down. And so I have 3 daughters, and my most memorable moments are just, that one-on-one time you get with them, or taking walks, all simple stuff. And then to answer the second part of that question, what's the goal for the Company Dads? It's to become the go-to place for fatherhood. And we want to be the CNN of fatherhood. And you think of CNN, whether you're in India, the United States, in the UK, you're watching CNN, but it's always sort of adapted to the local market. And we want to be a place where dads can come and get a lot of information that's positive and helpful, but it's, written by dads for dads to help them, in this journey and to grow as individuals and to be happy, connected fathers.
That's great. Well, they both are very energizing. I hope you get a lot of time with your daughters as we go forward. And I know how precious they are. And it changes, right? The older the nature of interaction changes, and you start to enjoy every phase of their lives. So I hope you get a lot of time, and more power to you for your mission of the Company of Dads. It's absolutely a worthy mission. It's changing the culture and the society in ways that you may not fully appreciate, but more power to you.
Thank you so much for having me on. I've thoroughly enjoyed talking to you. It was just a great time. So I really appreciate what you're doing.
Thanks so much, Paul. We'll be in touch, and you have a good evening and a good weekend ahead.
Perfect. You too.